house. No bullshit. They die.
Yeah, I can live with that.
Oh, I've been waiting for this one for a long time. The Punisher is my all-time favourite Marvel character, and after his season-stealing debut in Daredevil Season 2, it was time for the man who fought crime by any means necessary to stand front and centre in a series of his own. What makes Frank Castle such a fascinating character is that he doesn't sit on either the good or the bad side of the line. He walks on it. His actions are morally grey. He's not like the other vigilantes we've come to know in this universe. If the Punisher gets a chance to put his enemy down, if that's what he wants, you can be dead certain that will be the outcome. Jon Bernthal continues to reprise his role as the broken and damaged former Marine, still reeling from the tragic murder of his family. Story-wise, the Punisher is pretty straightforward. Frank wants one thing, and that is revenge. Plain and simple, anyone involved in the murder of his wife, daughter and son was to meet the same end. He caught up with the blacksmith, one of the main men responsible for the heinous crime, but that was just one name ticked off a long list. Castle's hunt for those responsible stretched even to the top seats within the CIA. Agent Orange, who later became known as the Director of Covert Operations William Rollins, was the figurehead and ultimately the main man responsible for the outcome for what's happened to Frank. He's had a bone to pick and, quite frankly, pun intended, is scared shitless of ever seeing Frank Castle again. Last they met, Frank cost him an eye, so perhaps it was that grudge and him seeking a little personal retribution that set him on a course for disaster with Frank's family. Paul Schultz does a commendable job in bringing Rollins to the table, and while at face value he was the villain for this first season, he was more of just the first obstacle as one of the Punisher's true enemies was being moulded from the very start. Ben Barnes' Billy Russo, or as I'm sure many of you know him by as Jigsaw, was a shining example of an arch-nemesis. Both him and Castle served together, fought together, and until recently viewed each other as brothers. Their rivalry is personal, and I was exceedingly pleased to see a lot of effort involved on the writer's part to make their bond be central for the show. It's how you properly craft a true villain. Slade Wilson will always be Arrow's top villain for that very reason. Time and effort, which is why for the future of the Punisher, things are looking positive as that rivalry is being properly unearthed. To speak on Russo, Ben Barnes played him so well it hurts. The pretty boy comments and him pointing out that he had scars everywhere but his face. Looking back, you can tell the seeds were being sown early on and that they were always setting him up for that ugly outcome. His confidence, charm and charisma were all equal, and if it continues, he has a chance to rise to the heights of Wilson Fisk, because let's be honest, I know some people think Kilgrave is Marvel's #1 villain, and yeah, he was excellent, but Vincent D'Onofrio is the kingpin in my book. There's a way to go for Russo to reach those heights, but if his performances continue like they did in this season, he's well within a shout of reaching up there. A lot about this version of the Punisher's story was how many of these former Marines dealt with life after they have served. We know what Frank's done up until now, as well as Billy, as they were in the same unit. But the show also gave us perspective from a completely different source, with Lewis, played by Daniel Webber, who was another former Marine and was suffering from post-traumatic stress. He just couldn't cope with life back in the US, and he was butting heads with everyone and anyone over sometimes minuscule things. Webber puts in a tremendous amount of effort and deserves some plaudits for how broken down Lewis became in the end. You could tell after time he didn't really want to go through with some of his actions, especially with his standoff with Frank, and on that occasion he chose the correct outcome, but some of his actions and intentions were unredeemable, and after almost killing Karen, he just had to go. Now mentioning Karen, Deborah Ann Wall makes her jump over from Daredevil to provide viewers with another recognisable face. She connected with Frank and was the only person really to do so in Daredevil, so it made sense for her to make a few appearances. She's not in it hugely, just less than half by my calculations I would say, but her bond with Frank gave him something to hang on to. Law enforcement-wise, Agent Madani and her partner Stein were the Homeland Security team entering the equation. Madani was trying to unveil the truth around her, and she formed a close and personal relationship with Russo. He was just manipulating her, of course, and it was a sucker punch to see Stein killed by him in one of her operations, but when needed, she could easily stand toe-to-toe with anyone who came across her. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, and at times she wanted to march straight to the head of the corruption list. She is bold and talented, a deadly combination. She eventually mellowed to Frank being, well, not one of the bad guys to help him take down Russo, but she didn't get out of it without a couple of close calls and plenty of bruises. Not as many as Frank, mind you, though I don't think anyone will be able to match him there. Now again, Billy Russo was no doubt one of the show's strongest aspects, but I have to say that the strongest was the budding partnership between Castle and another man who was thought to be dead in David Lieberman, aka Micro. He was the tech genius behind Castle's brute force. He was the brains behind the operations and helped Frank gather info for missions, and without him, it's a safe bet to say that Frank would have been dead many times over. At first, with Lieberman reaching out to Frank, with him being who he is and all, it wasn't plain sailing. A little bit of a beating here, strapped to a chair there, didn't exactly spell a partnership for the ages. But once the pair were of the same mindset, they became quite possibly the best partnership that any of these Marvel shows have yet to offer. Their back and forth was tremendous. Their cold, harsh banter was really funny. And some of the show's tensest moments was when Frank was visiting the Lieberman household and speaking with David's wife Sarah. It made you sympathise with the guy whose family thought him to be dead. Sarah was lonely and Frank was there helping them out. And as a viewer you were just going, don't, no, don't. Because we all knew David was listening to every word. It had to be excruciating for him to sit idly by whilst his family tried to cope. David is essentially the lead alongside Frank, someone who's hurting just as much but coming from a different perspective. And in any case, Frank and David's unlikely duo was the glue holding this show together.
Where'd they take him?
I don't know, man. That was need to know. You know how it is. I don't know anything.
Fair enough.
My overall verdict for The Punisher's first season is an extremely high 8 out of 10. I teetered on whether or not to give this a 9 because it is up there with Daredevil at the very top of the Marvel Netflix chain. I still think Daredevil Season 1 holds the crown, but Frank Castle's debut season was an insightful look into a character that stands morally conflicted. A lot of people just don't like the character because of his actions, but me, it makes me like a character more because of the complexion and depth that can be explored behind his questionable motives. The casting is immense. Amber Rose Reaver was very impressive in those action scenes. Ben Barnes was the charismatic arch-nemesis in the making, and Jason Mewes Curtis was Frank's guidance for what to do next. Standouts were the two partners, Frank and David. I don't think anyone can disagree with that one, and throwing Russo to make a top 3. Just overall, everybody played their part. The theme tune was cool, and that skull symbol, I tell you, will never get old. Creator Steve Lightfoot and the writers were bold, creative, and did not shy away from the very real PTSD issues. It excels in its handling of it, showing us the different ways that Frank, Billy, Lewis and the rest of the others try to get on with their lives. They dive right into the topic, and whilst we're here, gun control in this climate was never not going to be mentioned, but there was never really a time where you could tell it was being purposely shoved down our throats. It had a realistic presence in the series, giving that our title character was mainly a gun-wielding vigilante. They are the Punisher's go-to weaponry, and it was brought up with various characters voicing their differing opinions. Karen was the journalist, there was some big-shot politician trying to make his point, and ironically, whatever any of them thought, Frank still saved them all from having a very bad day. To briefly go on off a tangent, just because you know it's going to happen from some individuals, but fuck you to anybody who rags on this show to make a political statement. The Punisher is a long-standing comic book anti-hero who has been around for decades. It's supposed to be violent, gory, and staying truthful to its source material. What else can you expect? Iterations have been done before. For example, I really love Thomas Jane's take on the role. So for any critic, politician, or uneducated buffoon out there trying to make a point, just move along. Okay, sorry about that. So, as we know, Bernthal stole the show in Daredevil's second season when he showed up. Some say Bernthal isn't as beefy or bulky enough to take on a role like this. I disagree, but regardless of what you think, his grit and determination make Frank Castle one of the most fascinating characters in this Marvel universe. He's got that rough voice to match the character's personality, and in terms of action, this show delivers on every level. The brutality, choreography, and Frank's ruthlessness, it will make you see Frank believably as a one-man army. When he's in the zone, nothing can stop him, and if you're in his way, you are going to end up dead. Saying that, the body count for a Punisher show was far lower than I was expecting. It wasn't needlessly adding bodies left and right just to up its total. Deaths only occurred when they were mostly absolutely needed. The best episode for sure was episode 12. It was breathless, phenomenal. Frank being held up and tortured for answers, only for him to break free and give Rollins a gruesome demise, was thrilling to watch. Billy's conflicting emotions at the time made the viewing all that more intense. He made a promise to Frank to let him go easy, and Rollins wasn't exactly keen on that idea. Billy helped Frank get his revenge on Rollins in the end, so that was cool. The episodes around it were also some of the other strongest ones. Episode 11 had Frank in full-on Punisher mode, ripping through all of his enemies. And the finale had that deeply cut friendship coming to a head, as we certainly know why in the future Billy Russo will be known as Jigsaw. That fight was intense as hell and worth a rewatch already. My only small gripe was episode 10's time jumps back and forth, as they were occasionally a little distorting. You could understand it altering through the different perspectives, but it became a little confusing and it might have served to be better to stay in just one of the point of views. The episode was still top notch though, and throughout the whole series we had the familiar faces of Karen, who I've already mentioned, Ellison, and Clancy Brown even made a brief cameo to reaffirm his involvement in the plot. Now the ending surprised me. That could have easily acted as a series finale with Frank finally sitting down to discuss his troubles. It was a rare emotional Frank Castle sitting down to admit whatever's coming next scares him. Can he settle down in society? Will he take his new life and disappear, never to be seen again? Well, obviously not a hope for The Punisher Season 2, but it leaves the question, what puts him back on that warpath? Russo will more than likely be that reason, but in my mind it still can only be one of two things. Either Curtis will bite the bullet, which Russo already tried for, or disaster will meet the Lieberman family. Sadly, I can see option 2 being the more likely, as what other reason would David have for rejoining Frank? That is, if he does, of course. He's back with his family, so there's no need for the risk. And I can't see Frank asking him for help either, to be honest. But you never know, it could be something else entirely which spurs his return. But whatever it is, I cannot wait for more. The Punisher isn't your typical hero or good guy, far from it. He's a man intent on exacting revenge on those who killed his family. He's not a complicated man, and that is why I love the character so much. He's not like the other 95% of characters. You don't always know what you're gonna get. The show lived up to what I'd hoped for, and with an origin story crafted for the Punisher's arch-nemesis, the future is bright for one of Marvel's most intriguing characters. Frank, I'm glad you're back. That'll do it from me. What did you guys think of The Punisher's first season? What was your favourite performance this year? And when looking to the future, what story would you like to see next? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please leave a like, comment and subscribe if you enjoyed the review. And I'll see you on the next one.
Look at me, Frank. I did not want this.